Well, John, 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And we can even rewind farther than that if we're talking about the time you and Jesse went around the province of Ontario. How many times does maybe a smell, a look of the sky, some street somewhere take you back to one of those walks?
That happens all the time. And it happens more than people might think it happens. And I find, to be very honest, it's quite emotional, particularly when I'm in this part of the province, because Jesse and I were in this part of the province, and you know, people always say, which walk was more meaningful. And I'm honest, I think it was probably because in '95 Jesse was with me, and you can't change that. So it was a great time, but sometimes if I'm out speaking someplace and you're driving home and you come along some stretch of road and you look at someone's front lawn, a farm perhaps, and you say, oh yeah, I remember those people. We just knocked on their door and said, hey, do you mind if we park in your laneway and have our lunch here? And for a second they were just sort of, yeah, of course. And next thing you know, they're bringing out chairs and cold water and would you guys like some pie? My wife just made it, and it goes on and on and on. And when I drive home at night and I go past those places, yeah, it is kind of emotional to think back to that and how great it was and what a great job he did in being a real trooper on the road.
If we look back to your walk across Canada, this is something that started way out east, as far out east as you could go, right. Out in Newfoundland. You were going through places that weren't even connected to Ontario, that had no necessary connection to Jesse's journey, other than maybe there were boys there that suffered from Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Yeah. How long did it take to get that message going? We had no Twitter. We didn't have Facebook 20 years ago. We didn't have any of these things that help to spread messages everywhere now. How did you get the message spread?
Well, you're very right. For one thing, I went across Canada without a website. That's how far back we're going. But we had a great team of volunteers, and one of them, a very well-known London broadcaster in Peter Garland, and his sister, Joanne, lives in Newfoundland, and she was half of the Newfoundland connection. And then there was a lady named Kay Coxworthy who had just started work at a newspaper magazine, I should say, called Down Homer. It's printed in St. John's. It goes to Newfies, and I think it's safe to say that word, all over the world. And so Peter had written a letter, and Kay had just started working there, and she's on the ferry riding home, and she was trying to get caught up with some of the information as to the place she was going to be working, and she looks, and here's this letter from Peter. And she took it into her boss the next day and said, we should help this man, because that's what Peter said, if you could help this guy when he's going across and so on. And the boss said to Kay, you make it happen. So what happened was Peter's sister and Kay Coxworthy connected, and they found us places to put our heads down at night and to be fed all across Newfoundland, in fire halls and churches and all kinds of things, because we were scrounging at the start. When, as you say, it was early days, nobody knew what the heck we were doing, and that was great. And then the interesting part was they did this by fax, if you can remember back to fax, and telephone, and there was no email, and letters and packages they sent back and forth in the mail, and getting all this stuff put in place for somebody they'd never even met. And they did that for over 3 months. And then they never met each other until the night before we started. And we all got together for a screeching in ceremony. And it was a case of, are you Joanne? I am. Are you Kay? And I mean, how Canadian is that? And then on the way to that event, Kay said to her husband, Ed, you know, they're still looking for a driver for a couple of weeks in Newfoundland. And Ed has kind of salty language, so I'll tone this down, but he said, don't be getting me involved in any fundraisers. I've done my part for the country, thank you very much. Because he'd been a peacekeeper overseas and all kinds of stuff. And so he listened to what I had to say that night, and then on the way home he said to Kay, well, maybe I'll go for a week. And 10 months later, he went home, and no charge. And that's who's out there in Canada. It's amazing from coast to coast. That's who's out there, if you just scratch the surface a little bit.
You were able to meet so many people along the way because it went from Newfoundland, it went into the Atlantic provinces, it went through Quebec, it got to Ontario, and it kept building all the way out west. What do you say about people generally? Do we have a good country, or are people okay?
We have a great country. I found that people are exactly the same, no matter where you went. Particularly dads, and I met a lot of dads, and they want three things. They want to see their children healthy, they want to see them educated, and they want to be able to just work and retire in the best country in the world and just enjoy life. And that's really sort of what Canadians want. They're not out to set the world on fire. They just want to enjoy the peace and comfort that we have. And sometimes we forget that in pursuit of things that are, you know, bigger, better, faster, and so on. We forget that sometimes, yep, just being at home with the kids in the backyard, that's got everything beat. So,
whose idea was it to walk across the country?
I take full responsibility for this one. I plead guilty. When Jesse and I went across Ontario, we raised $1.5 million, and we were together for 124 days on the road. And on the way home from Ottawa, when I was driving, I knew then that I would try again. I didn't tell anybody for 2 years, because I just thought, we raised this money and then we gave it to research, so the cupboard was empty, and I thought, well, that wasn't very smart. Why don't we build something that'll fund research all the time? So I thought we need to start building an endowment, and people kind of laughed at me that you wouldn't get that off the ground. Well, now our endowment helps us generate about $1 million a year for research. So I think it was the right decision to make. And yeah, I just knew that I would try again, because I thought, I think we can do better than that financially. And oftentimes when these things are over, there's a tendency for the impact to taper off and fade. With Jesse's journey, it's been just the reverse. We finished going across Canada and raised $2 million, and we've gone on to build that ability to fund research higher and higher every year. And now the research community has found us. So, and we do have a website. So, so we get applications from all over the world now, and we're funding projects certainly in Canada, and a number in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and we're looking at applications in Italy and Australia, because there's a lot of really good stuff happening out there.
So in other words, you have fundraised enough that you have enough money that it simply makes money that you can donate to research every year. That's
the theory. I mean, you have years where, I mean, you're market connected, so when there's ups and downs, you suffer or you win with those, and we've done a lot more winning than suffering. We all suffered through 2008, there's no doubt about that. This most recent thing is not anything I don't think to worry about at all. It's just course corrections and things that were going to happen anyway, so there'll be a little blip there, I suppose, but it's not going to impact our ability to fund what we want to do. We have given out over $9 million in research dollars since our inception, and this being our anniversary year, I think you can pretty well read between the lines that we're hoping to reach a fair milestone in terms of what we'll be able to give out this year.
And I guess if we go back, because it's one thing to say, let's try it. Let's try and raise millions so that every year we just have money coming for research. We just have money coming for whatever is needed. The first thing you ever did couldn't have been as big as a walk across Canada, a walk around Ontario. Where did it start?
Well, our very first event was quite a humbling experience. We had a boot toll at Westmount Mall with the help of the firefighters. And it was mostly in coins. And we counted those coins on our kitchen table and rolled them in those little paper things and carried them off to the bank all day long, and they weigh a ton. Coins weigh a ton. And we raised $7,000 that day, and we thought we were millionaires when we finished the day. And I sat at that same kitchen table not long ago, and I signed 10 checks for $100,000 each for researchers. And I thought, yeah, that's not bad for a little charity our size, and we only have 4 people, so we're a pretty hard-working group, and we just commit ourselves to it. And sometimes I see a lot of movement within the not-for-profit sector, where you bump into people and they're no longer here, they're now over there, and so on. It used to be that radio was incredibly transient. I'm not sure it is quite as much anymore, but so I'll run into people and they move around, and but Jesse's journey, to be honest, Mike, it's a little bit like a calling. You really have to, you want to be there and be part of that. We've never had anybody who came there and wanted to know, well, how much do I get and when do I get my holidays? It's never been that. It's always been, you know, how can I make this even bigger and better? Because I don't know, I can't, it's one of those things I can't explain, but it's a little bit, as I say, like a calling to be there. And we're just incredibly proud of the people who have been there and all the volunteers. And as you said at the outset, all those people across Canada, some of whom aren't with us anymore, but I still think about them, and I call some of them and talk to them, and when you're on the road, you look at places and you say, yeah, I remember being there. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
How much time do you spend looking at some of the developments in research and wondering, is there going to be a day when the big headline comes, the cure?
I think a lot of charities want to have that, and that's a good thing because it keeps them focused on where they're going. Are there concrete steps? There really are. There are a few drugs in the pipeline that will make a huge difference in boys' lives and extend that life, which is what we want to do. And research comes in all kinds of areas. I had a researcher tell me not long ago that if Terry Fox had today what he had then, he'd still be here. So those are the kinds of advances that have been made, not just in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but on all fronts, and partly because of the tools we have now, partly because of the collaboration that we have where people work together to make things happen. So there are some really, really solid advances being made, and I would never want to say, you know, it's almost there, it's just over the horizon. I can solidly say we know it's there, that there is a cure. It's just now a matter of how long is it going to take us to close that gap. So it will happen certainly in my lifetime. I wish it had happened in Jesse's lifetime, but hey, life doesn't make any promises.
John, thank you for all that you've done. The story continues to be incredible year after year, and please keep it up.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for being part of it. Always appreciate it. All the best.